There comes a moment, sometimes quietly, sometimes like a freight train, when your nervous system sends you a signal you can't ignore anymore. It's the tightness in your chest when you wake up. It's the dopamine crash after scrolling for hours. It's the gut-level awareness that something is misaligned, not just in your habits, but in your identity. This isn't burnout. This is neurological fatigue. And it's telling you one thing: you need to reset. Let's be precise here. Resetting your life isn't a motivational concept. It's a biological necessity when your internal systems, neurological, hormonal, behavioral, fall out of sync with your goals and potential. So how do you force yourself to reset? It starts by disrupting homeostasis, not in a chaotic way, but intentionally. You must voluntarily introduce new stimuli that rewire your perception of control. Why? Because the brain is a prediction machine. When your daily patterns become predictable, the brain stops releasing key neurochemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine in efficient amounts. That's when motivation dies. That's when attention fragments. That's when identity starts to decay. Step 1. Control your first waking hour. Your circadian rhythm is the foundation of your entire behavioral and emotional architecture. If you don't dominate your morning, you've already surrendered your neurochemistry to randomness. Within 30 minutes of waking, you must expose your eyes to natural light, not artificial light, sunlight. This activates melanopsin cells in your retina that trigger a cascade of biological resets. Cortisol spikes for alertness, dopamine primes motivation circuits, and your pineal gland begins the countdown for melatonin release at night. One habit, one reset. Next, introduce deliberate cold exposure or physical movement. Why? Because when you voluntarily enter discomfort, your brain releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, not in a panic-driven way, but in a focused, controlled state. This sharpens attention and reduces inflammatory cytokines linked to low mood and cognitive fog. It reorients your nervous system toward action. Whether it's a cold shower, a sprint, or breathwork that simulates sympathetic arousal, you are training your system to move through resistance, not wait for clarity to arrive. Then comes the mental reset, cognitive load management. Most people don't realize this, but your ability to reset isn't just about effort, it's about capacity. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, emotional regulation, and working memory, has a finite daily budget. Scrolling social media burns it. Overcommitting burns it. So, if you want to reset your life, you need to give your cognitive system room to recover. Use the ultradian rhythm principle. Work in 90-minute blocks. Follow those blocks with 10-15 minutes of zero-in recovery. No screens, no conversations, no planning. Just stillness or movement without mental strain. This returns glucose and oxygen to key neural circuits. Do this 3 times a day, and you'll notice something strange happen. Your thoughts will become clear again, your memory will improve, and more importantly, your emotional baseline will stabilize. Next, strategic isolation. You can't reset your life while being bombarded by the old version of yourself through your environment. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is gated by focused attention and novelty. If you stay in the same physical, social, and digital environments that conditioned your current patterns, your brain will default to familiarity. You don't need to disappear forever, but you do need controlled solitude. At least 1 day a week, reduce inputs. No phone, no stimulation beyond nature, journaling, or reflection. This lowers dopamine thresholds. It breaks dependence on constant novelty, and it creates the neurochemical conditions necessary for insight, which is the seed of long-term transformation. Let's talk about goal restructuring. A reset is not just subtraction, it's redirection. You need to reconnect your behaviors with purpose. Behavior without vision leads to depletion. Vision without behavior leads to frustration. Your nervous system needs clear targets. Write down 3 things you want your life to feel like, not just look like. Then reverse engineer the physiological and behavioral steps to get there. Set protocols, not vague habits. Protocols are grounded, timed, repeatable actions. And repeatable action is how identity reforms. Finally, sleep. Sleep isn't rest, it's recalibration. Your glymphatic system clears out neurotoxic waste during deep sleep. Your hippocampus consolidates memory. Your emotional circuits, especially the amygdala, reset their sensitivity to triggers. Skip sleep, and your reset attempt becomes a neurological fantasy. So prioritize sleep as if your future depends on it, because biologically it does. Dim lights 2 hours before bed, no caffeine after 2 p.m., no screens 60 minutes before sleep. Use non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, protocols if needed, and wake up at the same time every day, even on weekends. This trains your circadian rhythm to serve you, not sabotage you. Let me leave you with this. Your life is not a static identity. It's a fluid system of behaviors, habits, and internal chemistry. You don't need to burn everything down to change. You need to direct neuroplasticity through intention and protocol. The system that got you here was built, consciously or not. That means it can be rebuilt consciously and deliberately. Force yourself to reset. Reset your light, reset your breath, reset your inputs, reset your sleep, reset your goals, reset your identity, one protocol at a time. And when you do, you don't just feel better, you become dangerous in the best, most precise, most intentional way possible. The first hour after you wake up is not just another 60-minute block of the day. It's a neural launch sequence that determines the chemistry of your brain, the regulation of your hormones, and the behavioral architecture for everything that follows. When you open your eyes, you are not simply transitioning from sleep to wakefulness. You are triggering a cascade of biological systems that dictate how focused, motivated, calm, or anxious you will be throughout the rest of your day. Most people miss this. They reach for their phone, scroll through notifications, or delay getting out of bed, and in doing so, they forfeit one of the most powerful levers for controlling their life, the neurobiology of the morning. As you wake, your brain shifts from the synchronized waves of deep sleep to a desynchronized alert state governed by your reticular activating system and specific neuromodulators. The primary actors in this transition are cortisol, dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. Cortisol rises naturally in the early morning. It's known as the cortisol awakening response. This is not a stress signal. It's a biological boost meant to promote alertness, immune activation, and metabolism. But for this natural rhythm to be effective, it needs one key signal, light. Specifically, bright light in the blue spectrum that activates melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells. These cells are not involved in vision. They're involved in timing. When they detect morning sunlight, they send signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your brain's master circadian clock, which resets your internal 24-hour rhythms. This includes when you'll feel tired later, when your body temperature will rise, and when you'll be most cognitively sharp. If you wake up and immediately expose yourself to outdoor light, ideally within 30 minutes, you reinforce this circadian anchoring system. The result is heightened alertness, improved mood regulation, and a more synchronized hormonal system. But if you skip this step, stay in dim indoor lighting, or worse, expose your eyes only to artificial light from screens, you delay your clock and fragment the coherence of your neural rhythms. Over time, this leads to inconsistent energy levels, poor sleep quality, and increased emotional instability. Dopamine also plays a central role here. Morning light and early movement, such as a walk or mild exercise, raise dopamine levels in the brain, especially in areas tied to motivation and reward. This doesn't just make you feel good, it sets a biochemical tone that influences your willingness to pursue effortful tasks later in the day. Dopamine is about anticipation. When you elevate it early and naturally, you prime your system to find reward in action rather than in passivity or distraction. This is one of the reasons why morning routines that include physical movement, even for just 10 minutes, are associated with greater productivity and resilience. It's not about burning calories, it's about chemical readiness. Another key factor during the first waking hour is the gating of focus. Acetylcholine, a neuromodulator that sharpens attention and supports neuroplasticity, is more available during the first 2 hours of the day. If you align this window with deep work, writing, learning, planning, you leverage your biology. But if you flood it with random digital inputs, such as email or social media, you teach your brain to seek novelty and reactivity instead of concentration and structure. Over time, this wires you for distraction. Breath is another overlooked tool in the first waking hour. Controlled breathing techniques such as cyclic physiological sighs or nasal inhales with extended exhales can immediately shift your autonomic nervous system from a sympathetic stress-dominant state into a more balanced parasympathetic tone. When you pair this with light and movement, you create a trifecta of sensory, behavioral, and neural inputs that elevate your state of readiness without the need for stimulants or external motivation. This is why caffeine, though useful, should not be your first action. Consuming caffeine immediately upon waking can mask your natural cortisol rhythm, leading to a mid-morning energy crash. Delaying caffeine by 90-120 minutes allows your system to use its built-in mechanisms before you introduce an exogenous stimulant. This preserves the effectiveness of caffeine and prevents long-term tolerance. The final component to master in your first waking hour is intention, not abstract motivation, but cognitive priming. When you wake and immediately define your key objectives for the day, whether through journaling, visualization, or verbal reinforcement, you activate neural circuits associated with goal-directed behavior. This creates a filter through which your brain processes the rest of the day's inputs. Without this, you're reactive. With it, you're proactive. And that makes all the difference. The first waking hour is not a luxury. It's a non-negotiable. If you want to reset your life, reset your biology. And the biological reset begins not with massive lifestyle change, but with owning the first 60 minutes after your eyes open. The human brain is not optimized for comfort. It's optimized for adaptation. From an evolutionary standpoint, the neural circuits we carry today were shaped not by ease, but by adversity. When we talk about growth, transformation, or change, what we're really referring to is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and reorganize itself in response to experience. And one of the most powerful yet overlooked catalysts of this plasticity is deliberate discomfort. Not chaos, not pain without purpose, but intentional exposure to challenge that signals the brain to wake up, recalibrate, and rewire itself for higher levels of function. When you deliberately engage in uncomfortable behaviors, cold exposure, breath hold training, high-intensity exercise, fasting, or even momentary stillness in anxiety-provoking situations, you trigger the release of neuromodulators like norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine. These chemicals are not random. They are precision tools designed to heighten alertness, increase energy availability, and sharpen focus. The discomfort acts as a signal telling your brain and body that the environment has changed and that it must adapt or fall behind. Epinephrine, more commonly known as adrenaline, is released by the adrenal medulla and primes your system for immediate action. It increases heart rate, opens airways, and diverts blood flow to muscles. But it also does something more subtle. It increases the signal-to-noise ratio in your brain, making neural circuits more sensitive to relevant information and less distracted by irrelevant background noise. This heightened state of neural clarity is the ideal condition for encoding new patterns and breaking old ones. In other words, it's where transformation happens. Deliberate discomfort also engages the locus ceruleus, a nucleus in the brainstem that is the primary source of norepinephrine. This area is responsible for scanning the environment for novelty and importance. When activated by discomfort, it releases norepinephrine throughout the cortex, facilitating attention, learning, and memory. The more focused the discomfort, such as in a cold shower or a breath hold, the stronger the signal to your brain that what is happening matters. And when the brain believes something matters, it rewires itself faster. But there's more. Discomfort, when chosen voluntarily, carries a completely different psychological and physiological profile than discomfort imposed unwillingly. Studies have shown that the perception of control during stress drastically alters the body's hormonal response. When you choose to face discomfort, the experience becomes less about survival and more about mastery. This shifts your internal state from fear to focus, from helplessness to agency. That shift is not just a mindset, it's a neurological reconfiguration of how your brain and body interpret threat and opportunity. Dopamine, often misunderstood as the molecule of pleasure, is more accurately the molecule of pursuit. It's released not when we receive rewards, but when we move toward them, especially in the face of resistance. When you engage in discomfort and overcome it, dopamine is released not only to reinforce the behavior, but to mark it as meaningful. This creates a positive feedback loop. You face something hard, your brain rewards you for it, and you become more likely to do it again. Over time, this doesn't just build resilience, it builds identity. One of the most powerful applications of this principle is in training stress tolerance. Most people experience stress as something that happens to them, but when you expose yourself to controlled stress through heat, cold, fasting, or even emotional vulnerability, you increase the threshold at which your system becomes overwhelmed. This is called hormesis, the biological phenomenon where a moderate stressor triggers adaptive benefits. With repetition, your nervous system recalibrates. What used to feel overwhelming begins to feel manageable. And eventually, what once felt impossible becomes your new baseline. Deliberate discomfort also enhances the brain's capacity to shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic states. This flexibility, known as autonomic balance, is crucial for recovery, focus, and long-term mental health. When you enter discomfort willingly and then guide yourself back into calm through breathing or stillness, you teach your nervous system that it can exit stress safely. This expands your window of tolerance and improves emotional regulation under pressure. In short, you become harder to shake. The point isn't to suffer needlessly, it's to use discomfort as a tool, as a lever, as a biological input that tells your brain, pay attention. This matters. Adapt now. Every time you override the impulse to seek comfort and instead choose challenge, you send a powerful signal to your nervous system. You are not a slave to old patterns. You are not stuck. You are in motion. And in that motion, the brain changes. Discomfort is not the enemy of well-being. It's the birthplace of transformation. The human brain is a high-efficiency organ with limited bandwidth. While it processes vast amounts of sensory data automatically, its capacity for conscious focus, decision-making, and emotional regulation is finite. This is what we refer to as cognitive load, the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory at any given moment. Most people live under the illusion that their brain can handle continuous input, multitasking, and constant engagement without consequence. In reality, unmanaged cognitive load drains your neural resources, blurs your decision-making, and leaves you in a state of mental fragmentation. To reset your life, you have to understand that the brain doesn't just need rest, it needs strategic load management to recover and recalibrate its performance systems. Every decision you make, from the trivial to the critical, draws from the same cognitive reservoir. Whether you're deciding what to wear, how to reply to an email, or how to manage a complex conversation, your brain taps into the prefrontal cortex, home of executive function. This area governs attention control, impulse regulation, planning, and working memory, but it fatigues with use. If you begin your day with a barrage of low-value decisions, you deplete your ability to perform well in high-value situations. This is why many of the most productive individuals in science, art, and leadership minimize early day choices. Fewer distractions, simpler routines, more energy for meaningful work. It's not minimalism for aesthetic reasons, it's neural conservation. What complicates this even more is the modern attention economy. Notifications, social media feeds, constant pings. These don't just interrupt, they fragment. They introduce micro decisions at a rapid pace. Should I check this now? Should I reply? Should I switch tasks? Every micro decision consumes glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitter supply in your frontal lobes. The cost isn't just time, it's the erosion of focus, the dilution of intention, and the depletion of mental resilience. The more fragmented your attention becomes, the harder it is for your brain to filter relevant information, resist distraction, or stay emotionally regulated under stress. This is why strategic recovery throughout the day is not optional, it's essential. The brain works best in rhythmic cycles, specifically the ultradian rhythm, cycles of approximately 90 minutes, where the brain can maintain high levels of focus and performance, followed by a necessary period of rest. During these high-performance intervals, neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine are active, supporting learning and attention. But after 90 minutes, their efficiency begins to drop, and continued effort without rest leads to cognitive fog, frustration, and poor performance. Instead of pushing through, the reset strategy is to take deliberate 10-15-minute breaks with zero input, not checking your phone, not listening to a podcast, true mental idleness. Walking, staring at the ceiling, light stretching. These moments allow the default mode network to activate, clearing mental backlog and recharging your executive function. Moreover, cognitive load is not just about the number of tasks. It's also about unresolved mental loops. When the brain holds on to incomplete thoughts, conversations, or plans, it keeps them active in working memory. This is called the Zeigarnik effect. It's why unclosed loops, like an unfinished email or a lingering argument, can haunt your attention span throughout the day. The solution is not to finish everything immediately, but to offload. Writing down thoughts, organizing to-do lists, or simply assigning a time to revisit the task gives the brain permission to release it. This frees up working memory, restores cognitive clarity, and reclaims energy that would otherwise be trapped in mental noise. Sleep, too, plays a critical role in cognitive load management. During slow-wave sleep, the brain performs a process called synaptic downscaling. It trims redundant neural connections to maintain efficiency. Think of it as neurological decluttering. Without adequate sleep, your brain not only fails to clear waste and consolidate memories, but also starts the next day with residual mental baggage. You can't reset your life if your brain is clogged with yesterday's unresolved data. This is why high-performance reset protocols always prioritize sleep hygiene as foundational. Another overlooked factor is emotional load. When your nervous system is in a prolonged state of alertness, whether from stress, uncertainty, or overstimulation, your brain allocates more resources to threat detection and less to reflection, creativity, or problem solving. Emotional regulation becomes more difficult under heavy cognitive load. The prefrontal cortex loses its grip on the amygdala, making it harder to control reactivity. Managing cognitive load isn't just about performance, it's about emotional resilience. Reducing unnecessary inputs, simplifying your decision environment, and giving your mind breathing room helps restore this balance. You can't willpower your way through cognitive fatigue. Your brain operates within physiological constraints, and pushing beyond those limits doesn't build strength, it builds burnout. To reset your life, you must reset your brain's operational rhythm, and that begins with managing what you allow it to carry. When you prioritize deep work, insert structured recovery, and learn to offload instead of overload, you create space for clarity, direction, and sustainable growth. Reset isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters with a mind that's ready to respond, not react. The brain thrives on patterns, but it evolves through disruption. In a world saturated with constant input, endless scrolling, conversations, emails, and ambient noise, the nervous system rarely receives the stillness it needs to integrate, reflect, and innovate. Isolation, when approached intentionally, is not a withdrawal from life, it is a neurological recalibration. It is a deliberate step away from the relentless stimulation that keeps the brain in reactive loops and toward a space where deeper levels of self-awareness, insight, and creativity can emerge. This isn't just philosophical, it's deeply biological. The absence of external noise allows the internal architecture of the brain to reorganize and reveal clarity that is otherwise buried under distraction. Every time we expose ourselves to a new message, headline, or notification, we introduce novelty, and novelty drives dopamine. That might sound beneficial, but constant unstructured dopamine stimulation desensitizes the brain's reward pathways and elevates the threshold for what feels meaningful. This leads to a paradox where we are constantly stimulated but rarely fulfilled. We feel busy yet directionless, productive yet unmotivated. The system is overloaded with fragments, and the brain never gets the opportunity to synthesize those fragments into meaning. Insight requires integration, and integration requires quiet. The default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and parts of the parietal lobe, becomes active when we are not focused on the outside world. It engages when we're daydreaming, reflecting, or imagining possibilities. Research shows that this network is crucial for autobiographical memory, future planning, and the construction of a coherent sense of self. But it doesn't come online when we are constantly interacting. It activates in solitude. In those moments when you sit alone, not performing or reacting, your brain is still working. But it's doing a different kind of work. It's stitching together memories, resolving inner conflicts, and simulating future scenarios. These processes are subtle, but essential. They don't just make you more introspective, they improve decision-making, goal-setting, and emotional regulation. Neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change in response to experience, is also heightened in novel, no-noise environments. When you enter solitude, especially in nature or unfamiliar settings, your brain is exposed to new sensory inputs with reduced cognitive interference. This creates ideal conditions for deep learning and restructuring. You may notice thoughts surfacing that you hadn't accessed in months. You may find that problems that seemed unsolvable begin to reveal new angles. This is because isolation removes the bandwidth-hogging stimuli and gives space for latent thoughts to rise into conscious awareness. Isolation also reduces what is known as social entrainment. When we are constantly around others, we unconsciously adapt to their rhythms, behaviors, and emotional states. This isn't inherently negative, it's part of our survival system, but over time, it can dilute your sense of internal direction. Solitude interrupts this entrainment. It allows you to detect your own emotional baseline without the interference of others' moods or opinions. In this space, values reemerge, priorities sharpen. You begin to distinguish between what you truly want and what you've been conditioned to pursue. This is not escapism, it's neural recentering. From a neurochemical standpoint, solitude modulates stress hormones and autonomic tone. When properly approached, periods of isolation lower cortisol levels and increase heart rate variability, a measure of parasympathetic activity and overall nervous system balance. This makes the brain more responsive and less reactive. It allows emotional information to be processed without triggering the full-blown stress response. In solitude, you are more likely to observe your thoughts than be consumed by them. Observational stance is the precursor to insight. It gives rise to what we often call intuition, though in reality it is the result of refined pattern recognition happening below the threshold of conscious awareness. But perhaps the most powerful function of isolation is its impact on time perception. In silence and space, time stretches. Moments become slower, more detailed, more textured. This altered temporal perception allows the brain to encode experiences with greater depth. You begin to notice subtle shifts in your mood, your attention, and your bodily sensations. These observations build interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense internal bodily states. And this awareness strengthens the connection between emotion and cognition. In practical terms, it makes you more in tune with your needs, your boundaries, and your motivations. Modern culture often equates isolation with loneliness or weakness, but from a neuroscientific perspective, the right kind of solitude is a high-performance reset. It's where your brain reclaims bandwidth, consolidates experience, and prepares for deliberate, focused action. It is in the silence between actions that wisdom emerges. It is in the pause that new neural pathways begin to form. It is in the space where nothing seems to happen that everything starts to change. When you step away from noise, not forever, but long enough, you don't disconnect from life, you reconnect to it. At the level where clarity, creativity, and conviction live. Change doesn't happen because we want it to. It happens because we create the conditions where our nervous system can reliably encode and repeat specific behaviors over time. This is the essence of a protocol, a structured, timed, and deliberate set of actions that transform intention into identity. Vague habits, by contrast, are suggestions without structure. They lack defined triggers, consistent timing, and measurable outcomes. The brain doesn't change based on what we think about doing. It changes based on what we repeatedly do, in a way that signals importance, urgency, and predictability. A protocol is not a motivational idea. It's a biological scaffold for neuroplasticity. The human brain is constantly filtering which information and behaviors to prioritize. It uses neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine to tag experiences as meaningful or forgettable. When an action is vague, like saying, I want to start meditating more, or I'll try to exercise tomorrow, it lacks the specificity required to engage those chemicals effectively. The brain registers it as uncertain, optional, and inconsistent. But when you declare at 6:30 a.m. every weekday, I will do 12 minutes of breath work using this app in this room with my phone in airplane mode, you've turned a wish into a protocol. That specificity, down to the time, location, and duration, engages the brain's goal-directed systems and prepares the body to execute. Every protocol functions on the foundation of three principles: cue, action, and reward. The cue is the sensory or environmental trigger that signals it's time to begin. This could be a time on the clock, an alarm sound, a place in your house, or even a mental state. The action is the behavior itself, the specific steps done in the same sequence that you want to become automatic. The reward isn't always a tangible prize. Often, it's the internal chemical prize, like the satisfaction of completion or the calm after breath work. But what matters is that your brain begins to associate the cue with the behavior and the outcome. Repeat this loop with precision, and the nervous system locks it in. Protocols work not because they're complex, but because they reduce ambiguity. Ambiguity is the enemy of neural commitment. When you leave room for negotiation, deciding each day whether, when, or how to do something, you create friction. Friction leads to hesitation. Hesitation triggers self-doubt, and self-doubt weakens the entire motivational circuitry. But when a protocol is simple, timed, and unambiguous, you reduce the cognitive load required to initiate it. The brain moves from deliberation to execution. Over time, this lowers the energy cost of the behavior and embeds it into your identity. There's also a neurochemical rhythm to protocol repetition. Dopamine is released in anticipation of a known reward, especially when the behavior is consistent. This means that once your brain understands the structure of a protocol, it begins to release motivation chemicals before you even start the activity. The anticipation itself becomes fuel. Additionally, when the behavior is repeated with focused attention, without distraction, it engages acetylcholine, which enhances the plasticity of the circuits involved. The more focused and repeated the protocol, the more permanent the neural change. Protocols are also inherently measurable. You can track them, you can assess them, you can adapt them without losing structure. Vague habits, by contrast, provide no feedback. If you say you'll eat healthier or read more, what does success look like? What happens if you skip a day? There's no feedback loop. But a protocol that defines the behavior and its frequency creates a binary measurement. Did it happen or not? This clarity builds accountability, and accountability builds trust with yourself. When your brain starts to associate you with follow-through, you develop not just discipline, but identity integrity. It's important to note that protocols aren't meant to be rigid forever. They serve a purpose to create the conditions for behavior to become automatic. Once embedded, the brain begins to carry out the protocol with less conscious effort. At this point, the behavior becomes a trait. But getting to that point requires structured repetition. You don't just stumble into discipline, you build it with protocols. And once it's built, it frees you from the mental drain of decision fatigue, internal negotiation, and motivational dependency. The more structured your actions become, the more adaptable your brain becomes. Protocols may seem limiting, but they unlock freedom. Freedom from chaos, freedom from inconsistency, and freedom from the mental fog that comes from trying to change without a map. Your nervous system craves patterns, and it thrives when those patterns are aligned with your goals. Replace vague hopes with structured sequences. Build the map. Walk it daily. Let your brain rewire around it. Let your identity be carved not by desire, but by action. Action performed consistently, precisely, and with purpose. That's how change becomes inevitable. That's how a new life begins.